Framing is like your virtual handshake. We know we can't walk into the room, extend a hand, and make contact with that person we are speaking with. But on video, we know that the way we show up and the way we frame ourselves can send a very strong message. The first thing you want to think about with your framing is the lens height. If the lens is below you and you're looking down on your audience right from the get-go, that's equivalent to shaking someone's hand really aggressively, squeezing it in a bone-crushing grip. If your lens is too high and it's looking down on you, that almost makes you feel and look a little more childlike. It would be the equivalent to a very limp, soft handshake. Now, this analogy might sound strange, but think about it from the perspective of your audience. When they see you, they're looking at you from the purview and the vantage point of your lens. So you really want to have the lens at eye height so that when we enter that virtual conversation, whether live or asynchronously, we're immediately sending that message of we are on an equal footing, of a perfect handshake. The other thing to really keep in mind with your framing is your distance to the lens. Now, sometimes we can get very excited and get super close to the lens, and this is a very intense experience for the audience. Most video recordings that we're doing on a Loom are happening within a professional context, and we want to respect the social distance that we're used to having when we're in person. So again, keeping in mind that that lens is essentially the reflection of the other person's perspective, if you extend your arm out, make sure there's at least another 2 inches of space between the tip of your finger and the back of that screen. The other benefit to the proper distance is that you actually get a lot more space to move around in. You don't feel as cramped and small. Right? We want to take up space and feel expansive on video, and our framing is a big part of what helps us set ourselves up for success. Finally, make sure you're centered, and there you have it, a perfect virtual handshake. Unlike in person, we have a huge opportunity on video to create a virtual environment that we have a lot of control over. What you're seeing now is a room that I actually took about 3 to 5 minutes and spent no money on redecorating so that I could have not a static environment for you, but more of a warm, pleasant, comfortable feeling. We can showcase personal effects like that recent trip you took, or family members or pets. You can bring in plants, you can use scarves for color. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated, it doesn't have to be fancy, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Touches of personalization can help your audience connect with you more quickly and be more curious about what you have to say, because at the end of the day, you are a real human with a real life, and you're taking time out of your day to share something important with your audience. So give this some thought and make some choices, whatever you feel comfortable with, and maybe you'll be comfortable enough to not blur your background on the next video call if that feels right for you. So background, again, is a really huge opportunity to personalize the effects of your virtual presence. Eye gaze on video is by far the most unnatural feeling part about connecting virtually. Especially when we're speaking with another human on the other end, it's very normal to want to look at the person that we're speaking to. But already we've lost a little bit of that direct connection that I established by looking into the lens while speaking to you. One of the things that I like to share about eye contact on video is that you really want to imagine the person who's on the other end. Whether you're live or connecting asynchronously, know that a human is going to be digesting and receiving this video. And so it behooves you to look into the lens when you're speaking for maximum effect and impact. Now, caveat. We tend to have bad habits when it comes to our blink rate on screens. We lower our blink rate and blink less than we might in person. So we actually have to think about the way we're blinking so that what doesn't happen is you stare into the lens because that's what Rachel told you to do, and you don't blink because you're working so hard and trying so hard to really make sure you're connecting with your audience. Wow, that is so intense and a little creepy and something we want to avoid. So think about how you might naturally and normally connect with someone in person. You definitely wouldn't stare them down because that is intense. You might look up and to the left or consider something over to the right, and bringing your eyes back to that anchor of your lens every time. You want to make sure you blink naturally, and I would definitely recommend rearranging your screen so that whatever it is that you may have to glance at is as close to that lens as possible. So my recording of myself is as close to the lens as possible, so that if I do feel like I need to look down briefly and look back up, it's not as obvious as looking down, or some of the worst offenders, looking completely off screen to check my notes and then coming back to connect with the people I'm speaking with. So things to think about as you rewire some of your eye gaze habits for the virtual world of connection. Facial expression variation and showing that we're engaged with our facial expressions is another area that needs a little bit of practice and getting used to on video. Our habits around screens are typically more passive, and so having our face fall into a neutral facial expression is pretty normal. But that neutral facial expression is loud for the audience and can often be perceived as a negative. So we want to make sure that our facial expressions are engaged and aligned with our intention. So if we are excited and enthused about something, we want to show that and express that. If we're frustrated or confused, we want to make sure that our facial expressions align with that as well. So it's not just about smiling more, right? We have this huge vocabulary of facial expressions that we can leverage. And we should also consider leveraging those when we are listening. As an actively and engaged listener, it doesn't have to be that we are in agreement with what someone says, but we want to be sending the cue that we're hearing and considering what the other person is saying. As an example, if I'm really excited and jazzed about something, I want you to feel a little bit of that excitement and enthusiasm as well. And I can do that by incorporating my whole vocabulary of physicality, but also especially facial expressions, since that is one of the primary and most visible cues on video. Conversely, I could use some very powerful words and let you know that I'm excited to be here connecting with you today, and particularly excited about sharing updates on a new product offering we have that is, in short, a game changer. Wow, is it really though? As an audience member, it's hard to connect with someone if you don't really know what it is they feel about something. And we want to make sure that our words align with our expression so that we have congruence, which is a big word, big and powerful word in nonverbal communication. So think about it. This will take a little bit of practice. It's equivalent to practicing in front of a mirror, but now we have these live animated replays that we can leverage to our benefit. Take some time to develop these muscles. Yes, we want it to feel authentic, and that can take some practice. So be patient and have some fun with it. Hand gestures on video is another one of those things that takes a little bit of habit rewiring. First of all, framing is crucial, because if your lens is not properly aligned, then you can be doing whatever you want with your hands, and it's going to be very hard for your audience to actually pick up on any of them. It could also feel weird for you because you'll feel like you have to have your hands up here by your face and your ears, which is definitely not a natural feeling. So what I like to recommend is positioning yourself, again, in a way that is comfortably framed so you have a lot more of your upper body showing than you might typically on video based on what you're used to. And then using open palms facing forward hand gestures is a great place to start, right? For example, if you're welcoming someone to a call or you're saying goodbye, those are two very easy ways to introduce some human hands. Another way is if you're asking a question or offering up some information, gesture to the other person in a way that makes it very clear that you would like to hear and consider what they have to say. Other hand gestures that can be particularly effective on video, just as I did, are these detailed hand gestures, right? So not a fist, because a fist can actually be perceived as pretty forceful and aggressive, but small, detailed, pinpoint, almost though you're holding a pencil or a pen, can be helpful if you're trying to get people to see the detailed components of something that may be large that you're breaking down for them, right? So playing around with a hand gesture vocabulary is something that will benefit you in person as well as virtually. And the reason it's so powerful and compelling virtually is that it immediately makes the conversation feel more human, right? We're used to seeing people's hands. It helps us develop trust with the person that we're speaking with. And from an evolutionary perspective, there are reasons why, particularly in Western cultures, we see these open hand postures as very reassuring, right? There's nothing that's being hidden. Someone's not on their phone while they're talking to you, right? Caveat: don't have your hands in the frame the whole time. This can get very distracting if you're constantly moving your hand gestures around, right? So you want to bring them in, give them some rest, play around with different cadences, different combinations, whatever starts to feel natural. The other caveat is that it can take a while to develop this vocabulary, and initially it may feel inauthentic. And that's normal because this is a new habit. Right? If we're building new muscle memory and new habits, there will always be a period of time that's a little uncomfortable. So give yourself the time and the space to practice. Send some asynchronous videos and see what comes up for you, right? I think you'll be surprised, and pleasantly so, as you get more and more used to this, that you have a lot to play around with. A conversation about nonverbal communication would be incomplete if we didn't consider the vocal cues of delivery. Nonverbal communication, in essence, is anything that communicates a message that isn't specifically a word. That's why we actually spent some time thinking about the nonverbals around lighting, framing, and background. Body language is the obvious aspect of nonverbal communication, and vocal delivery, the way we say our words, matters greatly, especially on video. Now, as we discussed in this article, intonation and uptick are two vocal variety cues that we can really play around with. Now, intonation is helpful because keeping our voice engaging and varied in its tone helps our audience stay in tune with what we're saying. If we're monotonous, we can very quickly lose our audience because their minds already start trying to pick up other sounds once they've established and identified one sound that stays the same. Uptick is something to take special care with because we don't want the ends of our sentences going up as we would in a question if these sentences are statements. So, for example, if I were to say, I'm a nonverbal communication expert, it actually seeds a little bit of doubt, a lack of confidence for our audience, and our audience is left thinking, well, are they questioning what they just said in a statement? So we want to keep our tone varied. We want to have good frequency and vocal variation, but we want to make sure that we are ending our statements without having that uptick at the end. It's something very subtle, but once you become aware of it, it's very, very obvious. So pay special attention to that and see if you can incorporate some more intonation variation while not having a question mark uptick at the end of any key statements. When we're recording asynchronous videos in particular, we have to pay special attention to our speech speed and our use of pauses. We are missing that audience reaction. So it can be very easy to run away with a script and start speaking really quickly because you know exactly what you're going to say, you know you're not going to be interrupted, but you also have a hard time really knowing when you should pause so that something you said can land with your audience. That's a lot. It's a big mouthful. It sends a sensation of being rushed, which can actually lose the interest of our audience much more quickly than if we take the time to get those enticing pieces of information out and let our audience pause for a moment to allow that information to sink in for their consideration. Speech speed and pausing go hand in hand, and it's not just about only slowing down. You can also speed up every once in a while to show and indicate interest and excitement. So these are things we can play around with, the vocal cues of speech speed and pausing on video, and especially keeping in mind that if you were connecting with someone in person, you would have a little bit more of a natural sensation of pausing to allow for their and ah and uhs. Play around with your own speech speed and pausing, and know that you can take liberties to do so in asynchronous videos, especially because no one's going to interrupt you. So it's awesome to be connecting with you guys, and I think that one of the things that can kind of slip in to our spoken word when we're on video, especially if we're not feeling super prepared, are filler words. And immediately we lose the crispness and the articulate quality that we can capture by being very intentional with our word selection and not allowing those filler words to come in to a space that could otherwise have been a very effective pause. Occasionally, people will say that you should avoid hedge words such as sort of, I think, maybe, perhaps. I actually think those can be pretty helpful and effective if used with strategy, right? If we're using those words to add a softness to what might otherwise be delivered with a certain level of aggression, it can be helpful. But we want to be using all of these words intentionally. Using a filler word can also be used intentionally if you're in an environment where you may lose the opportunity to speak, or you may have someone interrupting you. Asynchronously, that's not going to happen. So there's no reason for us to be using filler words that might actually diminish our authority as a speaker. Think of words as real estate, and you don't want to be giving key real estate up to filler words and noise. You want to deliver clear, articulate messages to your audience every single time. You have the opportunity to practice and rehearse and get it to the point where it feels natural, confident, and where it will really land with your audience.